Welcome to the channel, folks. My name's Shane. In today's video, I'm going to share with you 5 things I learned about the Panasonic Lumix GH5 Mark II before I destroyed it. The selfie screen snapped right off. I'm going to share with you how I did this and how you can avoid it happening to you with any camera that you choose to use at the end of the video. So if you want to hear about that, stay tuned until the end. I'm going to break this video down into sections so you can skip ahead, back or forth if you so choose. If you're coming from a micro four thirds camera or a Panasonic camera in general, there's a lot to like about this. A couple of things that are missing, but a lot of stuff has been added and improved that I don't hear a lot of people talking about. Let's get into it. First up, let's talk about video quality, because this is a no-brainer if you plan on buying a new camera. As soon as I hooked this up, I noticed a few differences in the look of the footage. The first one being, of course, you get 10-bit at 50 and 60 frames per second, which will appeal to a lot of people. But aside from that, we also get Vlog-Al as standard, so very similar to that of the Panasonic GH5S, and the footage grades beautifully. The biggest thing that I noticed about this camera is just how well Vlog-Al grades. It doesn't have that overly sharpened look that you find in a lot of micro four thirds cameras. It's very reminiscent of that of the Panasonic S5. And yes, I currently own one, so I have tested them side by side. In many ways, this is, as I predicted it would be, a micro four thirds version of the Panasonic S5, and I'll talk more about the difference a little later on, but overall, in terms of what you get picture quality out of this, it's really, really good. Just in terms of straight out of camera color science, I'm gonna give the nod to the Panasonic GH5 Mark II. It's very close, but slightly different to that of the Panasonic GH5S, which has more of a magenta skin tones thing going on. But this, straight out of camera, I'm a big fan of the color science. Now there's 2 slight exceptions to this rule. Cine-D and Cine-V. These are supposed to be upgraded, and in some ways they are, but I found I didn't like them at all on this camera when you compare them up against the Panasonic GH5S or GH5. So it does something really kind of weird to the skin. It almost shifts the color of your nose blue, and I just had no luck with it whatsoever. So if you do like Cine-D out of this camera and you choose to use it, it has better low light performance than that of the Panasonic GH5 at the same ISO values. So I did a low light test in this room with a couple of candles and no other lights, and I found that the Panasonic GH5 II had far less noise in the image over the original GH5. Now, this isn't a low light beast whatsoever, so if you still want that micro four thirds, get a GH5S, but it did far better than I was expecting. There's definitely some sort of new denoising algorithm going on when it comes to this camera, especially when you start pushing the ISO values up higher. The second thing that surprised me about the Panasonic GH5 Mark II was just how great 6.5 stops of stabilization is. Now that shouldn't surprise me, being that I also own an Olympus OMD EM1 Mark II, which has the best stabilization I've ever used in any camera. This is still the best, minus Catalyst software with Sony cameras, but that takes an additional step, right? So if you want great straight out of camera stabilization, then the Panasonic GH5 Mark II is a step up over the original. 6.5 stops versus 5, I think, doesn't really sound like that much, but it does equate to better stabilization, especially if you're doing any type of vlogging. Now, if you're the camera operator and you're doing some stationary shots, the IS boost in this is fantastic. It's just as good as the Panasonic GH5, except now it doesn't get sticky when you pan left to right. That was one of the biggest complaints on the GH5 over time as other camera companies got better at it, that the GH5 was a little sticky when you go to pan. This works great with both stabilized and unstabilized lenses. The third thing that really surprised me about the Panasonic GH5 Mark II is its autofocus performance. Now, I've tested and done many videos on the autofocus performance on all of the Panasonic cameras over the years, and I have to tell you that this is the best it's been alongside the Panasonic S5. Up until getting the Mark II, the S5 was by far the best. Face detection, which is a mode I'd actively avoid, is great on the S5, and it's finally great on the Panasonic GH5 II. Now, is it phase detection good or dual pixel autofocus good? No, it seems to work best, as Jordan Drake said in one of his videos from DP Review, at the higher frame rates and also at the faster shutter speeds, and he's right, that's where this shines. So I've been filming everything in 50 frames per second, being that I'm in a PAL region, and then cutting it back to 25p on the timeline, and it works a treat. So face detection is actually very usable. Just to give you a heads up on my settings with autofocus, in case you're wondering how I got these results, For any of the face tracking tests, I left everything set to 0. That's right, I didn't do anything special with the camera, and this would be a first. Any of the talking headshots that I like to do with these cameras, or even the GH5S, I set up a 1 area mode or the new 1 area plus mode on this, and that works a treat as well. I turn the sensitivity all the way down so it doesn't pulse. It does slow down the reaction time of the autofocus, but you don't get that same sort of hunting issue, or it's nowhere near as prominent. So Panasonic, they're getting it right. It's taking them far too long, but they're on the right track. The fourth thing that really surprised me about the GH5 Mark II is its slow motion capabilities. I would have no hesitations recommending this for someone who wants to do slow motion, with the exception of you don't get sound at the higher frame rates, and you also have to manually focus. But just in terms of straight up picture quality, this is up there with the Fuji X-T4, and I think it looks better than the GH5S. Now, I wish they had have put the slow and quick menu option on the dial like they did with the S5, being that these cameras are so similar to each other. But I guess it is one of those things, like if they change too much on a camera that everybody knows, people probably wouldn't like it. And I predict the GH6 will have the slow and quick menu button on the top. That's just my thoughts about it. No autofocus in the higher frame rates and no sound, unfortunately, but the picture quality in 1080p looks awesome. The fifth thing that surprised me about this new camera is a bit of a 2-in-1. So I'm gonna cheat and put two things in this, was the battery. So we get the same exact battery that you get in the Panasonic S5, and I thought, oh no, I'm gonna have to buy all new dummy batteries, and I've got a collection of like 8 Panasonic GH5 batteries that won't work in this camera, but it does. So if you've got old Panasonic batteries, it will work in this camera, whereas in the Panasonic S5, you can't use the old batteries in the new camera, it just won't fit. If you've got a Panasonic S5 and a GH5 Mark II, you'll get the same battery and they're interchangeable, and you've got 2 batteries at your disposal. So that's really cool. And all of my old dummy batteries that I use when I'm doing long form content like this work fine in the new GH5 Mark II, which is this one right here. The second part of this 2-in-1 is in regards to the audio preamps. Now, if you're using the 3.5mm input jack, you can now reduce the input gain on your microphone or wireless pack down to -18 dB or -18 dB, which is great. Usually that's only -12, and you also get a mute option if that's important to you as well. So I think that the audio input has been improved. These preamps sound just as great as the old ones, but with more flexibility in terms of being able to reduce gain. While this camera can do lots of other stuff I haven't commented on, like vertical video shooting, and it saves the metadata in the camera, it can also be used for live streaming, I only really like to comment on the stuff that I try and that I actually use. So I'll save that and go watch other videos where they showcase that. But overall, if you're in the market for a Panasonic GH5, or you just want the update where new firmware additions will be pumped through to this camera, then get the GH5 Mark II. It is a better camera. Now, there's one big thing that's missing on the Panasonic GH5 Mark II and on the S5, and it drives me crazy, and this may be a deal breaker for you, so I wanted to put this in just as a little bit of a sign off on the things that keep some balance in this review. So there's no touch to focus, right? And that's because I don't have a selfie screen. No, I broke it off. I'll talk about that in a sec. But if you ever use manual mode on a GH5, you can swipe on the screen and it will lock focus wherever you like. The S5 and the GH5 Mark II doesn't have that as of shooting this video. Now, I've reached out to Panasonic and a few Lumix ambassadors, and no one can find out how to turn that on. It's really weird that no one's talking about that. So if you're a big fan like I am of setting manual focus up, swiping on the screen, having it lock onto your subject or on yourself, which is how I use this GH5S, this won't do it. Neither will the S5. So where's that functionality, Panasonic? Bring it back, man. That was one thing that really sort of went, how do I do this? So the similar functionality is now you push the button on the back to lock sort of like autofocus in manual focus mode, but it's not the same. Touch to focus on the screen is so much better. If there's a way to bring it back, Panasonic, please do so. So it's gotten to that point in the video where I'm going to share my stupidity with you about how I smashed my Panasonic GH5 Mark II the second time I took it outdoors. I couldn't believe this. It was like within 4 days of owning it, or something like that, right? It was just crazy. So the way that it happened was I was outside doing a talking headshot video like this. I turned around from the tripod, the wind kicked up and it swung the tripod down, smashed this onto the ground. The selfie screen went flying. It's in the box right now. And yeah, it just was absolutely devastating. I've never had a tripod flip. I've also never had a wind gust kick up like that without really any warning. It was windy, but it got far worse like that. It was just as I was thinking I'm probably done for the day. I turn around, I go to grab my bag, this thing falls down, smashes, and the screen comes straight off. The good news is that this still works irrespective of having the screen on the back. So yeah, I'll give you some close-ups of how the hinge looks, but odds are I'm gonna get the hinge replaced and the selfie screen reattached once Panasonic have all the parts in Australia here. So yeah, brutal, absolutely brutal. So if you've ever used a tripod before, some of them have a hook on the bottom, and what that hook's designed to do, not just for hanging them up, thanks Peter Gregg for the tip on this one, but they're actually designed to weigh the tripod down. It's something that I was completely unaware of. I've never had this problem with anything falling over before outdoors or a big gust of wind like that kicking up. So the winds got so bad here that some trees came down and everything. So it was full on, and it was completely unexpected. And I've never done that to a new camera, and part of me was like, oh, just part of you dies inside when that happens. But you know, it can be fixed, so I am gonna get it fixed. Now, if you're new to the channel, I'm gonna do some comparison videos coming up, as well as an autofocus guide about the Panasonic GH5 Mark II, so stay tuned for that. If you have any questions about this camera that hasn't been addressed in other videos or in this video, please let me know. Thanks again for watching. Catch you soon. See ya.